let me introduce today's speaker. So it's Robert Haase. I think many of you might know him. So by training, he is a computer scientist, and currently he is focusing on AI for data analysis. So he studied computer science in Dresden and received a doctoral degree for his work on, and that I found interesting, I didn't actually know, optimization and validation of a swarm intelligence-based segmentation algorithm for low contrast positron emission tomography. Mega fancy, Robert. Very, very cool. I have to read your thesis, I think. So then he was a bioimage analyst at the MPI for cell biology in Dresden, followed by a postdoc in Jean Meyer's lab, where, among other things, he developed CLIJ, so the GPU-based bioimage analysis software that's also available via Python. And then he actually was a group leader, also in Dresden, at the Physics of Life cluster of excellence. And now he is in Leipzig, where he is a group leader at the, how do you pronounce this word?
SCATS AI.
SCATS AI Institute. Okay, very good. And I think with that, Robert, and I'm sorry for the online people that our camera here of the speaker is not so amazing, but we can't improve it at this stage. I hope it's fine.
Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction. So smart intelligence in this sense basically means ant algorithms. So ant colony optimization was a very cool algorithm before deep learning became a thing. So it's one of the situations where you finish your PhD and you switch the field right afterwards. And this happens sometimes in life. So nowadays I spend my time with large language models to do bioimage data science, and I was for the last 10, 15 years doing bioimage data science without language models. And I actually think, and this is what my talk is today about, that these language models can do this job very nicely without me in the future. So that's what I will talk today. But before we actually come to the large language model part, I will also spend some time in particular on the vision language models, which are also popping up these days more and more in talks and in social media as well. So if you think about combination of images and text, then you send an image and a text in a neural network, and then such a neural network could, for example, tell you how many cells are in this image. This is what a vision language model is, combining a prompt and image data to, for example, count cells in an image. And when the first models of this kind came up, I was quite intrigued, and that's why I started diving into this topic. This is a slide, maybe something like maybe even 2.5 years old. I was making fun about ChatGPT at the very beginning, because if you asked back in the days, ChatGPT, how many nuclei are in this image, it said 3. It was also quite reproducible, but at the end, still, I'm the one who did something wrong here in a sense, because I just asked once, and I should have done a proper analysis before making fun of ChatGPT on this particular slide. So yeah, I followed up at some point, and I then did this more systematically. So here you find the prompt on top, analyze the following image by counting the bright blobs, respond with the number only. Then I provide this prompt together with the image you see on the bottom, the famous blobs that give image to a language model, and then basically was plotting a violin plot in this case, the number of objects in this particular image. If I would now ask you here to tell me how many objects this image is, we may have a different distribution, but we may also have a distribution. So there is no, despite this image was analyzed in image analysis courses for hundreds or thousands times, there's no common sense of how many objects are in this image. It also depends on how you interpret it. Are these very small objects, should I count them? Should I not count them? Should I count the objects which touch the image border? Should I not count them? And that's why certainly a distribution is the right answer. And which one of these 3 distributions is debatable? I would argue that maybe the model on the very left is the least correct one. It was also a preview version of the GPT-4 model back in the days. And you see here that's from November 23 and that's from the beginning 24. I was also running this notebook again. You can click here on the bottom on this link. You could run this notebook again yourself and then basically replicate my science. And you may come to the conclusion that this model is no longer available. It was only on the server of this company in the US. And so the first lesson learned is we need to get physical control of models and infrastructure. So that's why more and more institutes, including the institute where I work, we have now our own language model server where we can decide on what is put there and when to take it offline, for example. So which models are actually capable of doing this kind of task and also could be downloaded and used locally. So I was following this domain quite for a long time, and you see here on the right there are plenty of models which do super terrible results in this context. And then suddenly, so I was observing this field for quite some time, and then suddenly in March 2025 there was the first open weight model I have seen which was capable of solving this particular problem in a similar, with a similar performance like the large language models on the remote servers before. So these are the Gamma models, Gamma 4b, Gamma 12b. They are both characterized by the fact that I can run them on my laptop. So a year ago or 1.5 years ago, this thing was new, and only the commercial providers were capable of doing it. And now, just 1.5 years later, we can download models and run them on our laptop and have similar performance. And I've seen similar effects in this domain happening quite frequently. If a new thing comes up and only the commercial providers have it, you pay for it, you can use it, you can play with it, you can build applications on top, and maybe a year later or 2 years later, there are then open alternatives you can then run locally. So it happened a couple of times to me in this particular domain. So another more advanced use case where I was for a long time thinking that will not be possible at all, because how could vision language models ever be able to do this? Is I would like to have a segmentation of objects, for example, a bounding box segmentation. So around every object should be a rectangle drawn made by a language model. So basically I provide an image to a vision language model and I ask with a prompt, can you please generate in JSON format, for example, bounding boxes which describe these objects. And I was for a long time thinking, technically this cannot work. But then people came up with a solution that you can basically do this and you can draw such an image if you put just a little bit of Python in between. So you have to process this JSON result and visualize it then afterwards. And here you see now 3 models and their performance. I was rerunning this like last week. So these are the most advanced models you can find from OpenAI and also from Anthropic. GPT-5 and Claude Opus are the really big capable models. And if you stare at these images for quite some time, in particular the GPT version, you say, yeah, it somehow does it right, but not exactly. So, and I was shocked by the Moondream model, which you see on the very right. This is again a model you can download and you can run on your laptop. It's a 2B model, which is 2 orders of magnitude smaller approximately, because we don't know how large the other 2 are. So this is obviously a small language model, a small vision language model, which is specialized for pointing at things and drawing bounding boxes around them. And it's also quite openly documented how you can train these models yourself. So for example, for this model, it is known on which data it was trained, and you could download all these data and do this yourself. So technically possible, and one could even with substantial time, I guess, train your own models for this particular purpose. Maybe, for example, make it more biological, use more biological data. Go to the data center of a famous European institute or an American institute, take all the segmentations they have, and train Moondream on a customized set of data. You can dive a little bit deeper into this model. I was intrigued here. So I was generating some simulated data where you just see a number of objects. You see a number of objects in breathing in this video. And that's what you also see on the plot on the right side. So it is guessing how many objects there are, so pointing at the objects, no longer drawing boxes, but pointing at them, is quite precise if it's more than 1 object and less than 50. So apparently, this is also what you find in the documentation, apparently this model was trained specifically on this range, on between 1 and 50 objects. And it's like easily to extend, I guess. And there will also be like additional technical constraints afterwards, because if you want to train a model which is good in this regime, but also put in counting millions of them, it cannot be as accurate in both domains. So depending on your use case, you may have to train a specific model which is capable of counting more than 50, or you cut your big data set into small planes where it's reasonable to have just 50 objects and then you can use this model as this. Again, I was quite amazed to see that it works in technically, and you see also when the number becomes quite huge, then also the result is corresponding to what you see on the right side. So this is what we machine learning folks tell each other every day or tell in basic trainings, don't apply your model out of domain. So apply it to data which is realistically comparable to the data it was trained on. Okay, so far we were basically going from image to image. And you see there is some development, there is stuff happening. It may take another, I will not say a number now, but it may take some years until we can ask a language model to tell us if it's cancer or not, or how many objects of this kind and that kind. So there is substantial work to do, and I guess it will happen. So more and more models of this kind will come up. So in the meantime, I'm more into this domain, and those of you who know me already know that I'm more in the domain of code generation. So I think if we want to get rid of this, the language model produces something that is correct to some degree, it is a good idea to generate code. We can then manually create the code and execute the code, and the code itself is reproducible. So we don't have to worry anymore about next time we execute, will still be the same. So we basically get from the execution, from the data analysis part, we get the language model out, but we use the language model for generating the code in the first place. And one famous use case here in this sense is that if you want to, for example, ask a language model which algorithm to apply to some data set, because there is common sense in the community about these kind of data can be processed, for example, in set pose. And he was also doing some small experiments to demonstrate the capabilities of the models you have at the moment. So this is a prompt. Basically, I'm telling the language model, you are a bioimage analysis expert. What is the best image processing algorithm to segment microscopy images? Very general. Answer with the algorithm name only and no explanations. I'm not providing any image in this sense, so this is a pure language model, let's say. And then this goes into this language model, and we get a word cloud, in this case back. The larger the word, the more likely is this response. I think I was also here asking 25 times. And you can reproduce this by executing the notebook on the very bottom. So apparently, set pose is a thing. And deep learning as well. I think also a UNet is quite common in this particular domain. And I googled deep lab, and I think deep lab is unrelated to this kind of data analysis. It's something else, but maybe was also mentioned in the biological context, and that's why maybe it shows up here. So this is the best algorithm, but is it the best for a specific image is the big question. So you are a bioimage analyst, this is now also a new prompt, and I'm modifying it here in this sentence. What is the best image processing algorithm to segment this microscopy image? And now I'm providing an image as well. So for this image, we should use watershed. And for this image, we should use O2 thresholding or maybe watershed. For this image, we should use watershed or maybe O2 thresholding. And for this image, we can use O2 thresholding, watershed, or maybe it appears a bit randomish, or always tells us something about image microscopy watersheds. So it does not look like very confident in what kind of knowledge is encoded in the language model. So maybe we have to provide this information to the language model as well. Normally the technique is called prompt engineering, but here you would actually extend this a little bit. It's actually already something called context engineering, because we are not just modifying the prompt, we are also providing images. So if I give a rule book, a short list, you see here these 4 rules, and I will also quickly go through them. You are a bioimage analyst expert, you have a rule book, what algorithm to use for specific images, for specific kinds of images. So if the image, if an image shows sparse objects such as nuclei, use O2 thresholding. So this is what's proposing then if I pass this particular image. If the image shows dense, partially overlapping objects such as nuclei, use star list. So it's now using star list, but not 100% confident. It's still proposing O2 thresholding from these 25 times I'm asking. In case of large cell-like structures, like with bright membranes, use the watershed algorithm, and this image is recognized very nicely. And in case of doubt, use cell pose or star list. So you see here also apparently there is in the network some relationship according to these two models are similar or solve similar problems, and that's why it's kind of replaceable. So, and this is basically the task, or one task we image analysts have to do now if we want to use vision language models in the future. We have to somehow write these rule books. They are encoded somewhere in the internet, it's written, that stardust is good for nuclei, and cell posts may be better for entire cells. And that's why we can use these things, but if we want to really have it in a reliable sense, we have to write these rules down and maybe also share them with each other and so on. At the moment, everybody is writing these rule books by themselves. Speaking of cell posts, I want to mention it here in this context because there is a term appearing more often, and I think cell post SAM actually fits to this term very nicely. If you go from such an image to a segmented image via some code executing cell posts, and you go from such an image to a segmented image with exactly the same code executing the same model in the background, and this one, then you can speak of the so-called foundation model. So there's many foundation models out there. So every second scientist is now publishing foundation models. But I think this is the first and only true foundation model I have seen in this particular context. No matter what data you put in, you get a reasonably good segmentation out. So this is what foundation models are supposed to be. Not being dependent so much on the input, but doing a good job anyway. Good. And yeah, we are talking a lot about segmentation. I myself have done it as well, almost the entire talk so far, and I want to cut at some point, because I think we have talked a lot about segmentation. Maybe we should also spend some time on other things. So you can obviously optimize the segmentation workflow. You can play a bit with some denoising parameters. You can introduce background removal, and then you can also make the convolution and guess or hope that the segmentation will become much better, maybe not. But there's so much more things you could do afterwards towards an insight. So from a segmented image, you typically do not get an insight. You have to do some data analysis, clustering, plotting, some proper statistics on top of it. Otherwise, you will not get anything out there. And I see a lot of people from the life science side struggling on this right side of this data analysis workflow. And then many of them, they do not really know what they are doing because they also learn it during studies, and there's unfortunately no computer scientists at the institute or no statistician who could help. And that's why they come back and turn circles of the segmentation part. So we can make, if our feature extraction algorithm does not work well, then it must be a problem of segmentation. You have to get a better segmentation. Then the entire PhD you're spending on improving the segmentation algorithm. You at the beginning thought you will do biology, but then afterwards you are a computational biologist, expert in image segmentation. It happened to so many people of us, including myself. So I call this the frontier of perfectionism. Basically, you never come to this actual data analysis part because you spend a lot of time on the segmentation side. Many of us are doing this, and I propose to overcome this frontier at some point. It is very hard though, because in order to know all these things, you have to have a huge variety of computational skills to achieve all this. And in particular, when you study biology or if you study physics, you may not be capable of also learning all of this. But if you ask ChatGPT, can you help me writing code for denoising and microscopy? Absolutely. Below is a clean single file Python script that blah blah blah. Can you help me writing code for segmenting? Absolutely. Can you help me extracting features? Yes, sure. Here you go. Can you help me writing code for human? Absolutely, I can. So ChatGPT can do all of this. And for those of you who may have tried, or for those of you who are working with ChatGPT only because it's so amazing, this slide might be quite important. So yes, you can ask ChatGPT also for writing code for clustering object based on the table of measurements. But it may be also reasonable to try out one of these other models. So here you see Gemini, and Gemini does not give you code, which may or may not work. Gemini asks some questions. What kind of objects are you trying to cluster? What kind of measurements do you have? And also, if you, for example, ask Claude from Anthropic, I'd be happy to help you with writing clustering code. To answer the most useful solution, you need to know what format is your measurement stored in, and so on. And that's actually very nice. And here you see the differences between these different models which exist. And depending on your use case, you should maybe choose the one or you should maybe choose the other. But a language model that just throws code at you may not be the perfect solution. In particular, you really want to achieve something useful for a particular use case. Again, if you were so far just playing with ChatGPT, like really a substantial part of our community is, at least try out these other solutions at some point. They all have free offers that you can pay for a month, not paying and so on. So we are a bit more interested into benchmarking large language models for bioimage analysis to have actual numbers on this. I'm actually glad that two co-authors, two co-workers, Jean-Karim and Christian are here today, who were basically helping me along this road. So we wanted to know it more precisely how good are large language models actually for code, for generating code that is used for bioimage analysis. Here you find a simple use case. We go from an image to a binary image to a labeled image. And then on the right, you see an area measurement in the average area. That was basically the task. We wanted to have a workflow generated by a large language model going from an image to an average area measurement of the objects in the image. And if you then ask this task, if you ask multiple language models, you get, and you ask multiple times, you get likelihoods or probabilities back of how often they succeed. Here, the reference is basically the human code, which was written by me or one of the colleagues. And you see the language models are performing differently. So if you ask GPT-4 Turbo, in this case from like a little bit more than 1.5 years ago, in 9 out of 10 cases, it was producing code which the code leads to the correct result. We were talking about functional correctness of Python code. If you ask Claude 3 Opus, which was the most powerful model back in the days, you had a 100% chance. So 10 out of these 10 cases, the code was doing the correct thing. Then if you go more further to the right, you also see a very nice, this Code Llama, an open model which was available back in the days. The likelihood goes down. And we had a couple of use cases of this benchmark like this. And I just picked some more to show you some examples. Also, this is an extremely common use case. We want to go from a table to a correlation matrix. This is in Python a single line of code. And the chance that these language models guess this code correctly is quite substantial, often like 100%. So in particular, when you talk about statistics, applying statistical tests, or wrangling tables, language models are super good in these kind of tasks because the internet is full of examples where people did this in training materials and so on. And this was all ingested for the training of the language models. Image analysis is a little bit different. And then there are these exotic file formats. Opening a ZAR file and then checking how often this works. And here in this case, GPT-4 Turbo was not capable of doing it at all. And at least Claude 3 managed in 7 out of 10 cases to open this file and read the pixels out, right? So this is a niche thing. Opening with a ZAR file is not as common as computing a correlation matrix from the table. It's quite obvious somehow, but still, there's like potential we can exploit, there's potential tools we can develop to make language models better in this particular subdomain. So we are benchmarking a couple of use cases, see them here on the right, plotted, and it's intentional that you cannot read the text, but maybe you may see that on the upper part of this plot, you see a couple of use cases which can be solved quite reliably from these language models, and you see on the bottom that there are also a couple of use cases where the language models are not capable of solving them at all. It may also be an issue of how we prompted it. There was also an ongoing discussion. I hope at some point there will be an updated version of that, but in very general you can say so. You also saw some patterns that, for example, if you work with files, it's less likely that language models produce reasonable code, which has something to do with how the language models may have been trained and aligned. Because you can easily ask language models to generate code for doing some math or for computing something. But if you want to work with files, you would have to have a system where actually files are loaded. So it's possible that the trainers of big large language models had never any use cases for working actually with files. And that's why language models are at the moment not so capable in this particular subdomain. Here you see also on the left side, you see also ordered from the top to the bottom, the more successful models and the less successful models. The field is led basically by the big commercial players like Claude and GPT. The data we are looking here at is something like a year old now, but I think still that the commercial models are leading this domain. And on the bottom, you find the open weight models, which you can download, which you can run, which are not as good as, but you can use them for free. And I guess also they will improve over time. So the question is now, how can we make this kind of tool accessible to people without need that you basically copy-paste between these two browser windows? Who feels like they are copy-pasting often between two browser windows with ChatGPT on the one side and some other tool on the other side? Don't be shy. That's maybe a quarter or 20%. And let me also ask another question. Who is coding here in the room? Regular data analysis. Who of you is using ChatGPT or similar tools sometimes? Okay, that's close to 100%, basically. Good. So the talk title is the impact of large language models on biology data science. I think raising your hands makes the impact quite clear already. This copy pasting between two windows is quite annoying. And also, if you work with specific tools like with Jupyter, you may also have a hard time because you cannot use this integrated development environment, so everything is quite convenient. So I, together with this, actually was a discussion which started here just 2 years ago at the same course which happens next week again. We were working on VLMs, a tool which is basically integrated in Jupyter, where you basically say percentage block, and then you phrase what should be done in natural language. Load blob stative, segment the bright objects, measure area parameter, and then show the original image, the segmented image, and in area versus parameter plot. It will generate code, and you can execute the code. And that was basically, I remember this discussion, because we had a bit different opinions back to this, and I was like, this is the correct way from a scientific perspective. The human is responsible for this code execution. That's why the human should read this code, and then the code gets executed. So this is the good scientific way. It was common sense. We came to common sense 2 years ago, and I think the community has moved ahead, including myself. So I will also show you how this has evolved over the years. So it's also quite fun. You can do this with vision language models. So you see here, percentage blob, and then image. Image is a variable. I was loading an image before, so this is how I can pass an image to Bob, to this AI system, together with what is in this microscopy image, and answer in one short sentence. And then Bob will answer, the microscopy image shows numerous cell nuclei scattered across the dark background. And then the biologist would say, yeah, that makes sense, that is a correct description. But what deep learning algorithm, what deep learning based Python library could be used to segment the nuclei? And then Bob may answer a deep learning based Python library that could be used here as CellPos. And where also the computer scientist says, yeah, this makes sense. So we can apply this algorithm to this kind of data. Then I can ask Bob, please provide Python code for applying this algorithm to my image. Make sure that the result is a labeled image of integer type, also visualize the result using an animated curve. So you see here already there is some technical blah blah in there, which we have to specify. So we have to know some programming terms in order to ensure that the language model is doing the right things. So you cannot do this without coding skills at all. You still have to learn programming in order to guide the language model the right way. And what's also quite important, and I think Loïc was telling it in the same seminar some time ago, you have to give the vision language model the chance to talk about the image. If you provide an image to a vision language model, you've seen it earlier in my prompt. If you provide an image to a vision language model and say, please write code to segment this image, it will very likely fail. But if you ask a vision language model, can you please describe what you find in this image, and then it says, well, there are nuclei, they are round, and they are not so dense, or very dense, then it can write better code. So it has to have an idea, some reasoning capabilities maybe, to think about what is in this image before it starts running. And then it will also provide code, and you can also execute this code, and then you will see the result, and then the biologist and the computer scientist will be happy. In this particular case, in this particular demonstration, like no code was edited, but it is actually very likely, I would say a 50-50 chance that you have to modify this code in a way, because there is some tiny details which you want to have differently, or the visualization is not what you were expecting. And then, of course, it is a matter of, do I just change this one line of code, or do I delete the entire code, modify the prompt, and let the code be recalibrated? But this is how Bob works, and I guess how some people are using it. So I have met users, and the download statistics suggest that this tool is used in the domain. Also here again, to proofread this code, you need programming skills. You cannot avoid this in very general. What is also an advantage of Wiredrop over other tools like ChatGPT is it knows your current environment. It knows which variables are in your current notebook open. It also knows what libraries are installed on your computer, and it also knows versions of libraries. So if I, for example, say, Bob, use CellPos to segment nuclear objects in this image, for example, the results, the generated code will be different depending on if you have Cellpost 3 or if you have Cellpost 4 installed. So with Cellpost 4, there are some backwards compatibility breaking changes because they do not have any, you cannot choose a model anymore because there is now this one foundation model which is supposed to solve all problems. And that's why you have to call Cellpost differently. And these are the annoying tasks of biology analysts on the street that you have to update, you have to read the documentation, how is this new thing called, and how is this function changed, and these kind of things Biopop is supposed to help users so that you do not have to read the very details of the documentation anymore, just get code updated easily. So this is like one use case, and if you, for example, notice that your library, your favorite library is not well supported, create a GitHub issue and can make it happen. This is like truth. These kind of things putting into Biopop are trivial. And then I was in the community last year. How much time do I have left, by the way? Oh, easy peasy. There was in the community, in the software development community last year, there was a substantial shift. Some really amazing things were happening because somebody asked the question, can large language models solve real-world GitHub issues? So those of you who do not know what a GitHub issue is, open source projects are hosted on github.com, and you can create an issue if something doesn't work with it. And then the software developer will come, will fix it, likely the same day. No, I'm joking. Sometimes it takes years. And then these open source projects are updated and they become better over time. This is what GitHub issues are for. And these guys here were wondering if large language models could potentially do this. And when I read this paper for the first time, I was diving deeply for the number. And it turns out they can do it successfully in 4% of the cases. And I was like, sweet, 4%. And it took me maybe months, certainly weeks, to realize, oh shit, they can do it in general. So others had the same idea, and then they started basically improving this. And this is a plot I made in June. So this benchmark, which was published back in the days, is now at 35%. So 35% of these GitHub issues can be solved by large language models. And there are also, unfortunately, I do not have the link with me today, but this is a benchmark which was published some time ago, so you can cheat a bit in achieving a good performance in this system. There is a new benchmark out which I like a lot. And if somebody is interested, I can pick out the link again. You can upload an AI system to a server, to this, I think it's a Kaggle challenge or something, and they will wait until a certain date. And then all the systems which were published until this date will then afterwards get GitHub issues to solve which are published after the date of submission. So you cannot cheat anymore. And if you achieve the best performance on this model, you get a million.
Actually, I just read a couple of days ago that it's actually, for some models, it's actually managing to read the future things. So the benchmarks is, for some of the cases, it solves the problem because it reads actually the resolution issue.
Exactly. And in order to avoid this, they come up with this new benchmark, which is about solving issues which are not published yet at the point in time when the systems are submitted.
Okay, you're referring to
basically, exactly. Yeah. Basically circumventing this problem. If you submit a system there, which then leads this benchmark, they give you $1 million. So that's a really good target, I would say, for those in this particular domain. So yeah, I was also intrigued by this 4% or 35, I don't care, but what was missing back in the days was a system where you can actually do this. This is benchmarks, this is computer scientists on their specific bubble doing something on their computer, but it is not applicable to real GitHub issues. So I basically developed Gitbob, which is an artificial intelligence system which lives in the GitHub CI. So it lives in the cloud. I do not have to install anything on my computer. And on a GitHub issue, for example, a domain expert, a biologist could come and say, hi, I have data and I would like to measure X. And then there's a data analyst, it could be me, for example, say, I propose algorithm ALP and Gitbob comment on how to do this with Python. And Gitbob, then it's actually just GPT-4o behind, so some ChatGPT model comes up with a typical answer, certainly. Try this, and it proposes some code. And I, the data scientist, I can have a look at this code, again, good scientific practice. And I can say, no, we should better visualize it differently, for example, with a violin plot. And I can also ask Gitbob asked Claude to try this. And then Gitbob could also use different language models in the further refinement of the code. Can also execute the code. This is new in this sense. It will also, if it executes the code and there's an error on the code, it will also fix the error and execute the code again as just a small for loop, no fancy science at that point. And at the end, to maintain good scientific practice, again, you would have to ask, it would be good if it happens, the data scientist says, yeah, okay, the code looks reasonable. And also the biologist can say, yeah, the results also look reasonable. So it turned out that this is a system where multiple people in one chat room can talk to multiple language models. And this was when I programmed it new. So I could publish it in a journal. Now you can buy this. So it's like just half a year later, there are plenty of companies out there who sell exactly this as a product. Because I was obviously not the only one who saw the potential, but I was the lucky one who could write a paper about it, which is, sometimes important for us. Here you see an example how this looks in action. And this is really something where I was producing training materials using GitHub. Hi GitHub, I'd like to have Python code for classifying images. I think the ResNet 50 models from Torch Vision may do the job. We can use this example image. And then it produces an answer. I worked on implementing image classification using ResNet 50, blah, 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 blah. And there are some files attached to it. Here you find a text file with the top classifications for this image. So you see in this image there is with the highest likelihood the sewing machine and the toaster and an iron. So it's not a problem of the AI who wrote this code, it's a problem of the ResNet 50 model. But anyway, and you can download the notebook which was doing this particular analysis. That's what I needed it for. I wanted to have some training materials for using the ResNet model. And this is like, you can click on this link, you can follow it up, you can also reproduce it. There's like no further interaction in between. I'm just asking a language model, can you please? And in the background, it's creating a notebook, running it, fixing issues, running the notebook again, and at some point comes back with a solution. And this is, again, you can also buy this I guess, the commercial products are much better than what I did because there's more developer involved and quality assurance department behind. But I think GitHub is a good opportunity to look in open source code how these kind of systems work. And the number of these systems are now dramatically increasing. The first one I have seen which can do this is Ada. Who has heard about Ada? That's good that I showed it here. It's also an open source project maintained by a single person, but this guy was one of the first ones doing it. Ada is a command line tool where you can say, oh, I would like to have a pinball game in Python using this and that library. Then Ada will go, will take half an hour, will burn $30, and then you have your app. So it's like really amazing. And again, an open source tool from the early days from this particular domain. Also the Jupyter AI people, so that's basically a little chat window in Jupyter, which can also create notebooks or write code for you. It's also a system which is out there for quite some time. Napari, who has heard about Napari, ChatGPT? Much better. Half of the people, a bit more. The bioimage.io chatbot is also such a system, but runs in the browser, can also generate code, can also do other things. ChatGPT came up with their own solution, they call it Codex. Cloud Code, we just discussed before, that may be the leading system these days, but it's also crazy expensive. And there's Cursor I'm also using. And I also like the initiative of the All Hands people, because this is also an open source project, but a quite complex one. You could theoretically run it on your own infrastructure to do exactly this, but they also offer some free services. So obviously you can use it in open source projects and they are collecting your data. So if it's free, you're part of the product. But it's nice that they do it and also that their code is open source. Also here you can have a look at how this complex multi-agent system is solving programming tasks. And these kind of systems are popping up every second week is a new one, and multiple companies going in this direction. If you can automate the job of coding, of software engineering, there's a lot of money to make, and that's why this is obviously a market. I also wanted to show a little bit where I am going, and that's why I would like to show you a sneak preview, basically, what comes after Bob. After Bob comes Alice. And you see here Alice, I'm asking Alice a similar way like I asked Bob in the Jupyter notebook, and I provide a very detailed description of the task which needs to be done. So there's an image in the input folder called time-lapse with two channels, nuclear envelope. and I would like to segment the nucleus using also thresholding, Gaussian blur, classical stuff. And I would like to measure the intensity on its outer pixels in the nuclear envelope channel. So I would like to measure the intensity there. And I'm describing this a little bit more in detail, also very precisely describing how the result is supposed to look like. This is how you talk to reasoning models. In normal language models, which we are using now for something like 3 years, we typically say what needs to be done. In the reasoning models, you have to either just or at least additionally provide how the result is supposed to look like. Because these models will continue reasoning and continue running if you do not provide a stopping condition. If you say, I would like to have a result of this shape, it should be an array, it should be a plot, the system can stop when it has fulfilled these conditions. This is the data set. Maybe somebody has seen it before because it was acquired at Andrew Heidelberg by Andrea Boni, something like 15, 20 years ago. I've using it before this. It's a famous one in some teaching materials to find this particular data set. That's why I'm also using it as a use case here. If I then ask Alice to do this, you see here how basically 10 threads are starting, and they are generating code, checking the code, fixing errors in the code, providing feedback to the code, updating the code, and this all runs in Docker containers in behind. And at some point, I have 10 results. So I basically see 10 different ways of solving this problem. And this is a major thing which, for example, ChatGPT or also the other systems are hiding to us. We have seen before when we were benchmarking these models that the chance that the model solves the problem correctly is not 100%. It's overall, on average, something like 60, 50, or 30% for the open models. That's why we actually maybe should have a look at all the results. So here on the Jupyter notebook, by the way, this takes at the moment at least approximately 30 minutes. I'm working on making this faster, but this is another story. And then you can go through these results and inspect them. And you could, for example, cherry pick the result which fits nicely to your hypothesis. It is also the reason why it's not open source yet. So I'm not publishing this until I have spent some more effort on either training people how to use it responsibly or ensuring that you can only use the system responsibly. But at least for me at the moment for debugging, it's important that I can have looked at all these results. I can also have a look at the intermediate results and what kind of improvements the language model proposed to itself to make it better. So overall, in general, in total, there were maybe something like 200 notebooks generated and executed in order to come to this point. Just for visualization purposes, and you can save, then if you can choose one, you can also save one of those notebooks and look at the data analysis in very detail here in this particular case. Again, language models were going over this a couple of times, improving it in multiple steps, and then you can basically see here the intermediate segmentation results, and then the plot on the very bottom. To show you a bit an overview of what this language model was, in particular in this context you're doing, you see here again this 10 plots from these 10 executions, from this final result which came out after a couple of refinement steps. And you could now stare at this plot for some time and also in relation to the video, and you may at some point conclude, maybe there are a couple of plots which look similar. So it's like not identical results, but you often see these two peaks at the beginning and then a decay over time. And this is in prompt engineering technique called self-consistency. So you could ask a language model multiple times, and if multiple of these results are correct, there is a chance that are the same. There's a chance that this result is correct because it was multiple times coming to the same conclusion. It's like asking multiple data analysts. I sent the same data set to Christian and to other image analysts. Can you please analyze? If multiple of them come back with the same result, there may be a chance that this is actually correct. And if there's somebody sending something that's different, then at least either of the two must be wrong. And this is basically the thing you must be careful here. So again, this data set was analyzed a couple of times in training materials. So here you see a plot from Kota Miura made in 2019, where basically he expressed his belief of what he sees in the data. I guess he was manipulating this code manually until something like this came out, and he was then confident that this plot fits nicely to the image. And it's different, even though these results were very consistent on the right side. So that's why here at that point, the strong indication that self-consistency is a necessary but not sufficient condition for functional correctness. If you ask a language model 10 times and the result is 10 times the same, it doesn't mean that it is correct, but maybe the chance may be higher. Good. With that, I will conclude that, artificial intelligence, large language models in bioimage data analysis, at least from my perspective, seem more and more unavoidable. If you still do this job without consulting ChatGPT from time to time, you may be wasting time or money. Maintaining good scientific practice is a challenge, though, in particular in this context of peer reviewing. So, what I would strongly recommend, if you want to dive deeper in this direction, compare different chat systems, different language models, and find one that is good for your particular use case, and also repeat this comparison, maybe not every second week, but maybe once a year or once every 2 years. So do not stay with a system because it was good on day one. In 1 year or 2 years, there may be other systems which are much better. And learn how to use AI responsibly. And this application of good scientific practice, we partially still have to figure out. Of course, we can have a look at these 10 notebooks and then just pick one. But maybe there are better ways, and maybe there are even ways that we can do it automatically. But yet, at least to my knowledge, such a system does not exist. So, from my perspective, we are on the edge towards AI agents analyzing English data autonomously. I'm looking forward to this day that this thing exists. That's, by the way, also what I do in my research work. Good. I would like to thank all the collaborators who helped here down this road. I also would like to thank the communities who basically make sure that we talk to each other and do things together instead of developing stuff in parallel. I would like to thank my team in Leipzig who keeps my back free while I'm traveling for a week to Heidelberg to meet you. And yeah, the funding agency, of course. And I thank you for your attention.
I think there's a really interesting chicken and egg problem where you mentioned that you need to know what you're doing to be able to look at the code and see if it's doing the right thing. If you have a thing that generates the code for you, you're less likely long-term to know what you're doing. How do we make sure that we are still training people to know what they're doing in that scenario where they can just press the button to get the code, right?
Yeah, so I started quite early with these kind of things, and today I must really say when I'm sitting in a train, I have no internet connection, I cannot use the language anymore, I'm screwed. So this descaling happens, it's a real thing. And I could imagine, so first of all, if you use the same language model for quite some time, and you generate code again and again and again, you will come to this point where you review code less precisely because you gain some confidence that this thing is always doing correctly. And I think this is perfectly fine. It's like using an image analysis software from a vendor where at the beginning you were careful and you carefully reviewed these automatic segmentations. And after using this for half a project, you know, the segmentations are always correct and you just take it as it is. So I think this is kind of human, it's okay, it's fine. It will be tricky when new language model versions come out, like with new software versions, and then suddenly things don't work anymore. This is actually happening in this domain, right? So I could also imagine in a future, which is maybe not next year, but some more time ahead, that we will not look at the code anymore at all, because we gained confidence. And then still, we need to apply good scientific practice. And the fun part is here, there's some lessons to learn. Our community has not learned in the years before language models, but could have learned. I have heard the following argument about skipping being careful. You do not have to check if this code is doing the right thing, because Robert wrote it. And Robert is doing a good job. Right? So this is breaking good scientific practice. No matter where code comes from a human, if it comes from a language model, you have to execute on data the model or the human has not seen. And you should annotate this data to know what the ground truth is, to be able to measure if the model is doing the correct thing or not. And this has been like that before language models, and it will be like that after language models. So, and this we have to, I think, as we do not have to write the code ourselves anymore, we would have more time for this. But we also have more time for more experiments. And I'm afraid that this will happen.
I think a similar problem exists in evaluating these, the usefulness of these models. Because when you write these type of rule books for this specific type of evaluations, I'm not so sure that you're somehow injecting information in between the lines. Like when you name, for this case, overlapping nuclei, this nuclei, and then you show only those type of images, you're pretty much, because you know already what needs to be done, you somehow write the rule book in a way that if somebody is also an expert, is understanding what you're talking about, even if you're not naming, right? And this type of thing, it's already in the training data, so machine learning model is just picking up that information.
There are certainly two aspects in this study. So first of all, also with this rule book, you can then benchmark the models and you can figure out if they do the right thing or not. I would also recommend that these rule books should not be written by individuals. So it's in image analysis in one thing, but for example, in administrative departments of universities, it's a more extreme case. If you, for example, have certain standard operating procedures in your department and you want to have the language model assist you with that, you should not write, you as an employee should not copy paste these standard procedures into a document and then use it with a language model. You should do it as a department. And so also the image analysts working in one particular institute, we should maybe come up with a rule book that covers the use cases in our institute. We do not have to have a general rule book for everything, but we should make sure that at least those people in our institute who produce those images, that their kinds of images and also the infrastructure we have and the algorithms we typically use are well covered. So for these kind of use cases, this rule book approach makes sense.
Yes, but when you think it this way, then what's the difference between justifying a rule book and letting a language model come up always with the same type of code rather than making a book with the use cases?
And what do I do with the book?
Well, if you have nuclei with this that are overlapping so and so, use this block of code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what
every single person.
I have not understand. Maybe I did not understand what's the difference between the rule book and the book you mentioned.
In the case when I mean, if you can take your time to do such a big effort of coming up with such a well-defined rule book, and just attach also some good examples to that.
Absolutely.
Then you're done.
I have not shown this slide, unfortunately, but this is what BioBob is. BioBob is a list of code samples. And then if you, for example, say, show me an image, a segmented image with a curtain, this is something, if you would program it yourself in Python, it would be like this. But it knows this one line of code which does it. So BioBob is a list of code snippets which you have use cases attached to it for the bioimaging domain, for our small domain. It's exactly what it is.
Okay.
So at the end, I'm not generating code out of the language model. I'm basically generating code. The language model is just responsible for assembling code from a couple of snippets. And then it will have very repeatable, reproducible, similar code snippets in similar use cases. That's exactly what it's thought to be.
So there's a question from Janilia.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Hey, this is Stefan. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. So, Robert, I have a couple of questions. Number one is, I think this is related to this one. If you look at ChatGPT 5 system prompt, for example, or other language models where they describe how to use a specific tool, there's currently everybody's basically just enumerating a couple of examples of how this should look, and then the model infers what to do about this. In your examples, you gave very specific instructions if you have an image with nuclei in a particular configuration, blah, 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 which is a little bit counterintuitive because it seems like you have to solve an image classification problem before you actually run something on it. Could you provide example images into your system prompt?
Yes, you can. I was trying this in a different situation. I was testing if language models can guess if a segmentation result looks good or bad. And I was applying exactly this strategy. The strategy is called future prompting, which you basically provide a couple of images and then associated classifications. This is a good segmentation, this is a bad segmentation. And now I give you an image and you tell me if it's good or bad segmentation. And I was not testing it very exhaustively, but I have seen that there was no big impact on this. So I presume that either the language model I was trying, GPT-5, has not this capability of this few-shot prompting with images, or there's some other technical constraint in there, but it's unlikely that it has no impact. And that's what I
Okay, but you haven't tried to just provide a couple of example images where method A should be used for, or method B should be used for method C.
For this use case, I have not tried, but it would be the same approach.
Yeah. So the second question is, you alluded to the Kaggle challenges for solving GitHub issues and how careful they make sure that there is no data leakage of the test data set into what the language models have actually seen before or have been trained on. And you made a little bit light of this, but I think it's actually super important to prevent this data leakage. And you know yourself, you're like super prolific and you talk about this stuff all the time and you publish it all over the internet and so on. And you keep reusing the same example images and the same kind of solutions to the answers and stuff like this, because that's probably the same teaching material. Do you have any idea how well your results on the benchmarks that you're doing generalize into domains that are not exactly the things that you keep doing?
So I have no idea because I did not look into this, but I know that I think there's now more benchmarks and models for pretty much everything. Yeah.
But everything that is public is eventually picked up by these models because it ends up in their training data sets, right?
Yes, and I think many domains have like specific ways for circumventing that. For example, I by chance also know that the ADA people, or mostly this one guy maintaining the ADA tool, this code assistant from the terminal, and they also have a benchmark, and this benchmark is kept in private. So I guess only this guy has it on his hard drive. And whenever a new model comes out, he plugs the model into ADA, and then he tests if ADA became better or not. So I guess every domain has some strategies for doing exactly this. Also, if you think about data leakage and benchmarking, this is also not an active research field, right? So these things have been there for ages.
No, that's why I was asking, because it feels like you're not currently trying to deal with that, and I was wondering if you have any plans. If you have any plans to actually develop a benchmark that can be used for a foreseeable time in the future, with reliable, generalizable results coming out of it.
I myself not. I guess with this new Alice thingy, I'm working on something like that because I want to have like entire data analysis problems solved in a sense which go much beyond what we did with the other benchmark. So I guess I will come up with some of those. I have some of those.
Then the last question, and I hope this is very short, and then I give up on this, is so you compared your GitHub pipeline, which is like a question answer system, to the more complex coding agents where a lot of sophisticated plumbing goes into how they talk to themselves, generate hypothesis, execute code, look at the results, refine, blah blah blah, and all those stuff. Do you think there's any benefit currently to use your question and answer Bob system in notebooks over an integration of Claude Code or something like this in VS Code, where it nicely integrates with notebooks, and you could basically have the agent run on stuff and show you intermediate results and so on, but do many more complicated things independently.
So again, I presume that the commercial systems, in particular the big ones, are much better than GitHub. So GitHub was, from that perspective, a prototype, a proof of principle to show how these kind of systems can work. In particular, if you want to involve multiple people and multiple language models in one chat window. Another advantage is that you basically have a record of which part of the code has been written by the AI and which part has been written by the human. Most of the AI systems you can buy hide this a little bit. So for example, if I ask GitHub Codex, ChatGPT Codex, to fix an issue for me, it will send a pull request, but this pull request looks like it was sent by me. There's in no way mentioned that a model was, an AI was doing that. And GitHub basically tracks exactly which version of GitHub and which language model was used. So from a scientific, good scientific practice point of view, it is a little bit better. I also know when it comes to, for example, generating PowerPoint presentations, GitHub is better than the other tools because I built this specifically in. But it may not be exactly a software engineering task.
Okay. So you can totally provide an agent's MD or Claude MD that tells a coding agent to use a different GitHub account for its own contributions than yours, and they usually abide to this.
Okay, and does it also
But it's a good thing.
model version and so on that was used for generating this code?
Yeah, you can instruct it to write this into the Git commits and stuff like this. But I think it's a good practice. So it sounds like a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think people should do it, but it's like not commonly done. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks for asking. I was speaking into the light of the projector. Chef Ham. Any other questions? Yes.
I think I want to come back to this reproducibility issue. And I think actually having the model write code that actually stays and is auditable is actually the right approach. I just want to say, for example, that I reviewed the paper at one point, and it was all based on prompt for ChatGPT 3.5 or something. But by the time the paper reached me as a reviewer, the model was actually not available anymore.
Yes.
So what can you do? I mean, you can't actually just reproduce, and it's all based on prompts which are very dependent on the model. So the whole thing would fall apart once the model is not available. So I think it also shows that you probably do have to run things on your own infrastructure so that actually you can make the models also available for just good practices.
I think having something 100% reproducible is still a challenge in this domain. So you have to basically use the same infrastructure, same graphics card, same driver version and this kind of things. Also the same library version for calling the model. You have to use the same very low temperature and the same random scene. So it's a long list of things you have to apply to get like 100% reproducibility of language model output. Technically achievable. At some point, I would guess, or I would say that we also have to live a little bit with this non-determinism, with this non-deterministic nature of the approach. So yes, the output of language models is not 100% reproducible, but if we call it 100 times, the average should still be the same.
I'm talking more about things where what you have to evaluate, for example, is directly these outputs. And I think I much prefer the approach where the final result is generated by code, and then you can have the code and rerun the code, and instead of having to rerun the prompts to evaluate the output.
That's why we do all this code generation thing. That's why we typically can download a notebook by the very end, and this notebook will stay in this. Exactly. Yeah, that's the idea. Awesome.
Okay. I think we could close, unless I don't see any other questions. So
I have a quick question, actually.
Oh, okay, go for it.
This is Mark from Genelia. I really like the integration into the notebooks because you can access a variable state. Is that dependent on the ability to print those variables out as a string?
So Firepop can per default not read variable values. It can only know which variables exist. So for example, if you ask Firepop, can you please segment the image, it will internally somehow look which variables are there which sound like a name for an image. And that's why it will, for example, if there is a variable named image, it will do the right thing. If you want to pass the value of a variable to the language model, you have to use curly brackets. This is the typical Python thing to do at this point. So you can also pass the stringified content of a variable, and you can pass images like I've shown with this percentage Bob image syntax.
Great. And second part is, have you ever tried this with a reactive notebook like IPyFlow or Marino?
So I have played a bit with Marino notebooks, and I'm not super satisfied by the way how they approach it, because if you save this file, the outputs are not saved. And with that, it actually loses the benefits Jupyter notebooks have, that you save the code and the result of the code together in one file. The cool thing about Marino notebooks is that you can export them to Jupyter notebooks.
One thing I like about reactive notebooks like Marino is that the state is a little bit more consistent. With Jupyter notebooks, you might execute some cells in some order, but not always clear about that. So.
Yeah, the good thing is if you ask a language model to, or if you ask code in a Docker container to execute a notebook which was auto-generated, it will execute the cells in the right order. You can make this sure at that point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, then now, thanks Mark for asking this last question. So Robert, thank you very much again. Yeah, thank you, Janelia and other online participants for listening, and yeah, see you next time. Ciao.